At 6:14 a.m. in the southern Caribbean Sea, the horizon is open and the water is calm. Nothing about the morning hints that the situation is about to tighten. Inside the Combat Information Center of a U.S. Navy surface ship, the radar picture looks routine right up until the moment it changes. A new surface contact appears at the edge of the display, then another, then a third, 3 separate returns closely spaced with similar profiles, all coming from the same bearing. The watch officer does not need to speak loudly. He simply leans toward the screen. The contacts are moving faster than expected. At first glance, they seem ordinary enough. Small regional warships, the kind commonly seen on patrol in nearby waters. But within seconds, the system refreshes their vectors. Their speed climbs. Their headings shift. The 3 tracks begin drawing together. Not by chance. On purpose. The combat system identifies them automatically as Venezuelan Navy surface vessels, older platforms, modest displacement, conventional deck guns. No launch indicators are detected. The range reads 21 nautical miles and closing. The U.S. ship holds its course and speed. No turn, no visible change in posture. Under international law, there is no reason to alter movement. The transit is lawful, conducted in international waters, planned and recorded well in advance. The officer of the deck asked for confirmation. Verify CPA. The Combat Information Center runs the numbers. The closest point of approach is getting smaller. If all 3 vessels stay on their present headings, they will pass well inside normal safety margins. And at sea, separation is more than distance on a chart. It can say a great deal about intent. At 6:18, the Venezuelan ships increase speed again, nearly at the same moment. That is when the room turns quiet. Acceleration by itself does not prove anything. Coordinated acceleration across 3 hulls is another matter. The tactical picture updates live. 1 vessel edges to port, 1 stays near the centerline, and 1 drifts to starboard. It is not an outright strike pattern, but it is clearly more than harmless navigation. It is pressure, applied with precision. The bridge is informed, long-range optics come online. High-resolution cameras lock onto the contacts and pull clear images through the morning haze. Hull numbers begin to sharpen. Gun mounts are visible, crew movement can be seen on deck. Everything is being recorded. At 6:21, the first bridge-to-bridge call is sent. Venezuelan naval vessels, this is a United States Navy warship operating in international waters. You are closing at high speed. State your intentions. No reply. The call goes out again, this time in Spanish. Still nothing. The silence is noted, time-stamped, and entered into the log. The ship's outward posture does not change. No weapons are pointed, no alarms sound. But inside the Combat Information Center, the ship is fully alert now. Electronic support measures begin passive collection. Any emissions from the approaching vessels are captured, sorted, and stored. The system does not interfere. It listens. At sea, every platform reveals something, whether it means to or not. By 6:24, the range has fallen below 15 nautical miles. The Venezuelan vessels are now maneuvering in ways that are impossible to dismiss as routine. Their courses are no longer parallel. They are shaping the encounter, tightening the space, narrowing the options. This is not careless seamanship. The commanding officer enters CIC. He does not ask for a summary. He studies the display and gives a short instruction. Maintain ROE. Log everything. The rules are clear. The U.S. Navy does not raise the temperature unless it must. Presence comes first. Record-keeping comes first. Action comes later, if it becomes necessary. Another hail is sent. Again, no response. At this range, even small errors carry real consequences. A sudden turn, a delayed correction, a wrong read of the situation, none of it takes much. Steel ships moving at sea do not stop on demand, and collisions have no interest in politics. Then the nearest Venezuelan vessel changes course by 3 degrees, just enough to tighten the geometry again. CPA drops once more. 6 minutes to closest approach. CIC updates the threat board. There is still no fire control radar, no visible signs of weapons being readied. But posture is shifting, and posture tells its own story. This is the point professionals recognize immediately. Not open conflict, not yet. This is the narrow space just before choices begin to matter. The U.S. ship remains steady. Engines continue at constant RPM. The helm does not waver. On the surface, almost nothing seems to change. Below deck, everything is focused. Every sensor is fixed on the contacts. Every second is recorded. Every movement is preserved in sharp detail. 3 warships are rushing toward a U.S. Navy ship in international waters. And for the first time that morning, everyone in the room understands the same thing. Whatever happens next will stay on the record. By 6:27 a.m., the range slips through 12 nautical miles. At that distance, navigation is no longer theoretical. Every course adjustment matters. Every knot of speed has weight. Steel hulls moving at more than 20 knots leave little room for hesitation. Inside CIC, the tactical picture grows tighter. The 3 Venezuelan warships are no longer behaving like separate contacts. Their movement is now linked. Subtle, controlled, deliberate. One remains on the center line, continuing straight in. One edges to port, cutting the distance. The third slides to starboard, widening the angle. It is not a textbook formation, but it does not need to be. It is enough to create pressure. The closest point of approach shrinks again, now falling below 2 nautical miles. At sea, that matters. It is a narrow margin, small enough for confusion to become an incident, small enough that intent can no longer be treated as a guess. The bridge receives the update. The officer of the deck acknowledges it without reaction. The helm stays steady. Course unchanged. Speed unchanged. The U.S. Navy ship is not going to be the first to give ground. At 6:29, the commanding officer orders the next move. Not escalation, presence, prep aviation. On the flight deck, the response is immediate. The MH-60 Seahawk crew is already up and following the situation over internal communications. Equipment is checked, systems come online. The helicopter does not launch yet, but its status shifts from ready to immediate. Inside the Combat Information Center, the optics sharpen again. Faces can now be made out on the Venezuelan decks. Sailors move near the rails. One gun mount turns a few degrees. It is not manned, but it is no longer fully at rest. That detail is logged. Another bridge-to-bridge warning is sent, shorter this time and more direct. Venezuelan naval vessels, you are maneuvering unsafely. Alter course immediately. Once again, there is no reply. Electronic support measures begin picking up faint signals. Surface search radar, low power, intermittent. Not a targeting lock, not fire control radar, but enough to confirm an important point. They are actively tracking. The electronic warfare officer calls it out. The data is captured, tagged, and stored automatically. Every pulse becomes part of the record. Every signal adds shape to the pattern. At 6:32, the center Venezuelan ship increases speed again. Just 2 knots, but at this distance, 2 knots is enough to matter. The vessel to port tightens its angle. CPA drops below 1.5 nautical miles. Time to CPA, 4 minutes. This is no longer ordinary shadowing. Shadowing preserves space. This reduces it. The commanding officer watches the plot and gives the order in an even tone. Launch the helo. On the flight deck, rotors begin to turn. The Seahawk lifts smoothly into the air and banks low across the water. No visible weapons, no aggressive posture. Just sensors, cameras, and unmistakable authority. From above, the geometry changes at once. The helicopter's FLIR locks onto the nearest Venezuelan ship. Heat signatures appear in sharp detail. Engine exhaust, bridge windows, movement on deck. Everything is captured in stabilized, high-resolution imagery. This is not a show of force. It is a clear act of documentation. The Seahawk moves into position off the bow quarter of the nearest Venezuelan vessel, holding a few hundred feet above the surface. Close enough to be seen, far enough to remain safe. A green laser flashes briefly. Non-lethal, unmistakable, passing across the bridge windows before moving away. Then the radio breaks its silence. Venezuelan naval vessel. This is a United States Navy helicopter. You are operating unsafely in international waters. Your actions are being recorded. The message is repeated in Spanish. For the first time since the contacts appeared, the scene begins to shift. On the Venezuelan deck, sailors pause. One steps away from the rail, another turns toward the bridge. The gun mount stops moving. Speed begins to come off slowly and deliberately. Inside CIC, the watch team confirms it. Center contact reducing speed. The vessel to port holds course, but no longer tightens the angle. The ship to starboard opens its line by a single degree. Barely visible, but real. It is not a withdrawal, but it is hesitation. The Seahawk holds position, cameras steady, sensors still running. Nothing abrupt, nothing reckless. The helicopter does not pursue. It simply remains there. From above, the message is unmistakable, and it is delivered without a single round fired. Below, the U.S. Navy ship continues on the same heading it has held since the first contact. At 6:36, the CPA begins to widen. The geometry starts to relax. Not dramatically, not all at once, but clearly. The pressure breaks. Inside the Combat Information Center, no one celebrates, no one speaks. The team keeps logging, keeps recording, keeps watching. Because at sea, moments like this are not measured by what nearly happened. They are measured by who shaped what happened next. By 6:38 a.m., the distance is opening. Not quickly, but enough to show on the display. In CIC, the tactical picture updates live. The 3 Venezuelan warships are no longer compressing the space around the U.S. ship. Their headings are beginning to separate, degree by degree. Small changes, but decisive ones. This is the turning point. Only minutes earlier, the encounter had been tightening. Now it is beginning to unwind. The MH-60 Seahawk stays on station, holding a smooth orbit above the water. Its presence remains calm, deliberate, and unhurried. The helicopter is not chasing because it does not need to. Its sensors are already doing the work. Every frame is being recorded. Every movement is time-stamped. Every choice is now part of a permanent record. The Combat Information Center confirms the shift. Contact 1 is reducing speed. CPA is widening. The ship to port keeps its course, but it is no longer pressing inward. The vessel to starboard eases farther out, increasing lateral spacing. The three ships are no longer moving as a single coordinated shape. The pressure pattern is coming apart. On the bridge of the U.S. Navy ship, nothing changes. Course stays steady. Speed stays constant. There is no victory turn, no chase, no reaction beyond disciplined professionalism. In encounters at sea, that matters. Escalation is not measured by movement alone. It is measured by restraint. The Seahawk adjusts slightly, repositioning to keep all three vessels in view. Its sensors sweep across decks, antennas, and exhaust stacks. No weapons appear to be manned, no fire control radar is detected. The electronic warfare officer confirms it, passive only. That detail matters. The commanding officer acknowledges with a quiet nod. The helicopter remains airborne. Recording continues. At 6:41, the first radio call finally comes from the Venezuelan side. It is short, controlled, and carefully worded. United States naval vessel, we are conducting routine patrol operations near Venezuelan waters. It is not an apology. It is not an admission. It is something more subtle. It is a step away from the edge. The response from the U.S. ship comes back immediately, clear and exact. Venezuelan naval vessels. This is a United States Navy warship conducting lawful transit in international waters. Your maneuvers have been recorded. Maintain safe distance. No extra wording, no emotion, no bargaining. Then the channel falls silent again, but the silence has changed. The Venezuelan ships continue opening the distance. Their wakes spread wider, their angles soften. What had looked like deliberate convergence half an hour earlier now begins to resemble ordinary separation. At 6:44, the Seahawk completes one last orbit. Its work is done. The sensors have collected everything needed. Visual evidence, electronic signatures, positional data. The helicopter turns smoothly back toward the ship. No dramatic exit, no message beyond procedure. On deck, the recovery team is already in place. The Seahawk lands cleanly, rotors slowing as sailors move in with practiced precision. Data cards are removed at once and sent below. The chain of evidence begins immediately. Inside the Combat Information Center, analysts review the key moments. Course shifts, speed changes, laser designation, timestamps, radar emissions. The encounter is no longer just something that happened. It is now a documented record. By 6:48, the nearest Venezuelan vessel is more than 5 nautical miles off the starboard quarter. The other two are opening farther still. None of them tries to close the gap again. The situation is over, but not because of force. This is the part many people miss. Nothing happened in the way dramatic headlines usually prefer. No shots, no weapons aimed, no alarms echoing through the ship. And yet the outcome changed completely. The balance shifted the moment the encounter stopped being ambiguous. The moment intent was documented. The moment actions were logged. The moment pressure lost the cover of uncertainty. For Venezuela, any further maneuver now carried a different meaning. It would no longer be open to interpretation. It would be evidence. For the U.S. Navy, the objective had already been achieved. Maintain presence, avoid escalation, record everything. At 6:52, the bridge reports that the Venezuelan ships are holding separation. The commanding officer gives a single instruction: resume normal watch. The ship continues its transit exactly as planned hours earlier. Engines steady, course true, no deviation logged. Astern, 3 Venezuelan warships remain visible on radar, but they are no longer a factor. The encounter is finished, not because one side was louder, not because one side pushed harder, but because one side controlled the exact moment when pressure became proof. And at sea, proof has a longer life than intimidation ever will. By 7:02 a.m., the encounter is no longer active. The 3 Venezuelan warships are still on radar, but their tracks are steady, widening, predictable. No acceleration, no converging headings, no fresh attempt to shape the geometry. From a distance, it might seem uneventful. Up close, it was decisive. Inside the Combat Information Center, the focus has shifted from response to analysis. The question is no longer what is happening, but why it ended the way it did. The answer is not firepower. On paper, the U.S. Navy ship holds a clear advantage. Advanced sensors, integrated combat systems, layered defenses. None of that was brought into play. None of it needed to be. What mattered was control. They are decided by whoever can shape the story of escalation without letting it turn into open conflict. For Venezuela, continuing the approach would have brought immediate consequences, not just on the tactical level, but on the strategic one. Every maneuver had been captured, every course adjustment recorded, every second marked in time. The MH-60 Seahawk sensors did more than observe. They preserved. High-resolution imagery of deck activity, bridge behavior, and gun positioning was already stored. Electronic support measures collected radar signals and communication patterns. Positional data fixed the encounter to an exact place and time. That changed everything. As long as the situation remained unclear, Venezuela could apply pressure without fully owning it. A close pass could be described as coincidence. A burst of speed could be framed as routine navigation. Radio silence could be dismissed as confusion. But the moment the documentation became undeniable, that uncertainty vanished. From that point on, any further escalation would not be a matter of interpretation. It would be a matter of proof. This is where modern naval power shows itself most clearly. The U.S. Navy did not threaten. It did not chase. It did not answer pressure with matching pressure. It created a record, and that record would reach far beyond the horizon. It could be reviewed by commanders, examined by legal teams, and passed through diplomatic channels. In an age when maritime encounters are studied frame by frame, evidence carries more weight than rhetoric ever can. For the Venezuelan commanders at sea, the calculation changed immediately. Any additional aggressive move would no longer function as a signal. It would become an incident, and incidents carry consequences. They invite scrutiny, they generate responses, they narrow future choices. Pulling back did not mean surrender, it meant regaining control over what might happen next, from the U.S. Navy's side, the result aligned exactly with doctrine. Presence before pressure, pressure before force. Force only when no other option remains. The encounter showed what restraint looks like when it is backed by real capability. The American ship never changed course, never changed tone, never put its weapons on display. That steadiness was not passive, it was deliberate. By refusing to mirror the aggression, the U.S. Navy denied Venezuela the escalation it may have been looking for. There was no dramatic reaction to exploit, no confrontation to showcase, no image of force meeting force. What remained was professionalism. That matters in a region where symbolic wins can matter just as much as tactical ones. A close pass caught on camera can be turned into messaging. A sharp response can be presented as provocation. But restraint leaves very little room to reshape the story. The Venezuelan ships were allowed to disengage without humiliation. There was no pursuit, no extended shadowing beyond a safe distance. The exit remained controlled and clean. That too was intentional. Managing escalation is not only about preventing conflict, it is also about shaping what follows. By 7:08, analysts aboard the U.S. ship were already organizing the data. Sensor logs, video clips, radar tracks, communication records, all sorted, all secured. The encounter would be reviewed later, away from the pressure of the moment. Patterns would be measured against earlier incidents. Intent would be judged not by emotion, but by evidence. For Venezuela, that carried an uncomfortable message. They had tested the boundary and found that it would hold. Not through gunfire, not through threats, through documentation and discipline. The lesson was quiet, but unmistakable. The U.S. Navy does not need to escalate to control an encounter. It only needs to remain present, professional, and ready to prove exactly what happened. By the time the Venezuelan ships faded farther into the background, the decisive moment had already passed. Pressure had been applied, the response had been measured, the outcome had already taken shape, and no one on either side needed to say it aloud. Because at sea, the side that controls the record controls the story, and once that story is established, it becomes much harder to challenge. By 7:15 a.m., the Caribbean is calm again. The radar picture is clear. The 3 Venezuelan warships are still there, but now at a distance. Steady headings, widening separation, no further maneuvering. The moment of compression is over. For the U.S. Navy ship, the mission never changed. Course steady, speed constant, transit uninterrupted. From the outside, it appears routine, just another gray warship moving through open water. Inside, the encounter is already part of the record, cataloged, stored, and understood. The MH-60 Seahawk is secured on deck. Its data has been transferred, checked, and archived. Video feeds are indexed by time and position. Radar tracks are aligned with navigation logs. Electronic emissions are labeled and compared against known profiles. Nothing dramatic remains. And that is exactly the point. This encounter sent a message, but not the kind delivered through direct force or dramatic warnings. It showed what restraint looks like when it is backed by real capability. For Venezuela, the takeaway was not that the U.S. Navy holds the advantage. That was never in question. The real lesson was that pressure loses its value the moment it becomes accountable. Once actions are recorded, the room to maneuver begins to shrink. Once intent is documented, uncertainty fades. And once uncertainty is gone, pressure stops being an effective tool. The 3 naval vessels that moved in earlier did not pull back because they were intimidated. They pulled back because pressing further would have meant accepting full responsibility for whatever came next. That difference matters. The U.S. Navy did not go looking for confrontation. It did not react emotionally. It did not try to control the moment through overt force. Instead, it allowed the other side to choose how far to go, while making sure that every choice would be preserved on the record. That is how control is exercised at sea in the 21st century. As the ship continues its transit, the crew returns to routine operations. Watches rotate, logs are updated, meals are served. The professionalism never slips because professionalism is the posture. For the sailors who stood watch during the encounter, there is no celebration. There rarely is. Close approaches are part of the job. Handling them correctly is not extraordinary. It is the standard. What matters is that the ship remained predictable, that every action matched doctrine, and that every response left no space for misunderstanding. This is how escalation is prevented, not through raw strength alone, but through discipline. Somewhere beyond the horizon, the 3 Venezuelan naval vessels continue their patrols. Their crews now carry first-hand experience of how quickly pressure can turn into proof, and how little flexibility remains once that happens. The encounter will be reviewed on both sides. Analysts will examine the data. Commanders will draw conclusions. Patterns will be added to future assessments. Nothing about it will simply fade away. That is the lasting impact of moments like this. No major headlines appeared in real time. No urgent alerts lit up screens. No direct exchange took place. And yet the effect reaches far beyond the point of contact. Every future approach will now be shaped, at least in part, by what happened here. Every future decision will carry the reminder that restraint is not passivity, and silence is not absence. The U.S. Navy ship gradually disappears into the distance, holding the same course it had before the first radar contact appeared hours earlier. The sea closes behind it, but the message remains. At sea, power is not proven by how quickly you close the distance. It is proven by how calmly you hold your line, and by how completely you document the moment when others decide to test it. And when that moment passes, as it did here, the most important part is not what nearly happened. It is what was prevented.